Sick of getting blisters? Stop slipping and just be comfortable with Pure Grip Socks Pro. Great fit, great comfort, lots of grip, and an even better price. Available now at puregripsocks.com.
Despite Adidas seemingly getting credit, especially from the younger generation, for inventing laceless football boots with the 2016 Adidas Ace Pure Control, it was actually Lotto 10 years earlier in 2006 that created the first ever laceless boot in the VIII Gravity, where 5 years ago, Lotto re-entered the laceless football boot arena with a model of their own that was not only less expensive than anything Adidas was making, but arguably every bit as good, if not better. And inside this box, I have what is their 8th generation of that boot, which is a little bit misleading because technically the first one was 3, then there was a 4, they skipped 5, then there was 6, technically, I think there were 7, and now we're on 8. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to the Lotto Solista 108 Gravity. What is technically not a brand new release. These have actually been out for a couple of months, but US availability just became a thing. It is their top of the line, mid-cut, laceless, knitted upper football boot, bearing a very specific retail price of $212. And as you can see, if you're familiar with past models, the graphics are a little bit different, but the boots themselves are still exactly as they were 5 years ago. And I'm not kidding. Here's a 3, this is a 4, and this is the new 8. Exactly the same football boot, just with some different graphics, in what is quite possibly one of the strangest color combinations ever to be featured on a pair of football boots. Even the colorway on the box is incredibly weird. Sunny lime, surf the web, and all white. And I'm not trying to pick on Lotto here, but inside the box they include this little poster that gives you kind of a history of them making laceless football boots, but even the poster hasn't been updated in that it still says Solista 104 Gravity. Having said that, like we regularly talk about on this channel, newer does not always equal better. And while I don't necessarily agree with them changing the model number as many times as they have without actually making any physical changes to the boot, there's no denying that the Solista 108 Gravity, possibly one of the worst names for a pair of football boots of all time, by the way, is still a really solid product if you're looking for a laceless upper construction and generally the feel of a pair of socks in football boot form. At a price tag that is also much lower than what you would pay for a top-end Adidas laceless boot, we're considering that these are not the most popular. While they technically just came out in the US and you're not going to get them deeply discounted, you can already find these for basically half price in some parts of Europe, which makes them an incredible value for money if you can get them that deeply discounted. So despite this being a new 5-year-old pair of football boots, we're going to talk about the good, the bad, how they fit and feel on feet, and generally where these stack up amongst other laceless football boots currently on the market. So if you're interested in learning more, please stick around, and if you are interested in a pair for yourself, you can pick them up below their normal retail price by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes by checking out the first link down below. And as always, if you guys enjoy the unsugar-coated, brutally honest reviews on the channel, don't forget to drop a like on the video and make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2024. So first things first, let's talk about the upper, where obviously the main selling feature here is the fact that it is a laceless construction. And as far as laceless football boots go, these are actually very, very simple. You're going to find that the upper is made from what they're calling a 3D knit material, which has these ridges running the length of the upper, and generally it's super soft. It's very sock-like, it has a little bit of padding to the liner, despite still being very, very thin, and for the most part, offering that barefoot feel on the ball, where you do have that little bit of padding, but that does not mean that there's a lot of bulk or protection to this upper. If you get stepped on, it just doesn't have a lot of structure to it. You're gonna feel every bit of your opponent's studs. With that in mind, it is incredibly sock-like and pretty much requires no break-in time at all. So if you really are looking for that sock-like experience, I'm not so sure that any other football boot on the market offers that to the extreme that these do. The one criticism that I would make about them is partially because of the lack of structure to the material, as well as the fact that it is a laceless design, where inevitably lockdown just isn't going to be as good as if you had some type of a fastening system. They're not necessarily going to be the most responsive boots in the world, but again, if you want a pair of boots that effectively you can slide on and they just feel like a pair of socks, I don't think anything does it quite like these. When it comes to the design of the actual laceless system though, there is an elephant in the room to be addressed, and when you talk about when these first came out, the original Solista 103 Gravity, because that makes sense for some reason. There's another football boot that was already out on the market the year before that these definitely have some visual similarities to. And that's the Adidas Predator 18 Plus. Also a terrible name for a football boot. Where if you look at the design of the laceless system, this is rounded off at the bottom, this is squared off, but you can see where the inspiration comes from. Even the cut of the collar is pretty similar between the two. Is it an exact copy? Obviously not, but you can definitely tell where perhaps some of the inspiration came from, which is not the best thing in the world to see. I understand that Lotto is the original inventor of laceless football boots, so in theory, every laceless boot that came after them is a copy of their design, not the other way around. But given that this is their comeback to laceless football boots, personally, I would have liked to have seen something that was maybe a little bit more original from a design perspective. What is different though, and something that I really do like about the Solista, is the fact that they've actually reinforced this elasticated knit material with a layer of thin polyurethane. So it still has that ability to stretch, but it does restrict the stretch quite significantly to where you do get a little bit more of a tight fit across the top of the foot because of this laceless design. Sometimes when you leave elasticated knit fully exposed, like it would be on these Predators and like it has been on a lot of Adidas laceless football boots with this elasticated prime knit, this just stretches way too easily. This gives it that little bit of restriction that does make them a little bit more difficult to put on, but once they're on your feet, they do end up feeling relatively secure. And as far as lockdown goes in a pair of laceless boots, obviously your mileage may vary depending on how these fit, but I do think that they've actually done a really good job with making something that has the stretch that allows for ease of putting the boots on and taking them off, but also has the structure to help hold your foot in place. Where speaking of the quality of fit, one of the fatal flaws of a laceless design is that you don't have any adjustability. The shape is the shape. If you need them a little bit tighter, you don't have that option. But internally, you'll find that the Solista does feature a pretty standard insole. It's got this really soft liner on the surface, and it's made from a single layer of this black foam. But inside the box, they include this little pouch that if you open it up, you'll find these two little orange insoles that are made from a slightly firmer foam, where you can see that they say double fit, and that is their double fit system for the sake of eliminating a little bit of extra volume inside of the football boot, where if you find that they're a little bit too loose, predominantly this way rather than this way, you can't really adjust the width of the boots because of the laceless design. But if you need to eat up a little bit of volume, you would simply place this orange insole underneath the regular one, and because it's a firmer foam, still quite thin, that actually makes a really big difference in terms of cutting down the volume inside of the football boots and making them fit that little bit tighter, despite them technically not having an adjustable lacing system. Where granted, you could technically do this with any laceless football boots by just sliding in some thicker insoles, but the fact that they include these extra ones inside of the box with the boots, I think is a really clever system and something that more laceless football boots should include. Moving to the rear, you'll find that the Solistas do feature a mid-cut design by way of an elasticated knit collar that is pretty much the same as every other knit collar you can find in football boots these days. Nothing really to talk about there. The heel is lacking in structure other than the external heel counter that you have connected to the sole plate itself. I like the softness of the heel. I think that makes for a very comfortable feel overall, because internally you're going to find a decent amount of padding and this really soft kind of microfiber material to the liner itself, where I think it grabs your heel in a way that is both comfortable but also secure, which is obviously super important when you're talking about a laceless boot, where as long as you get the sizing right and the shape of the boot as a whole works okay with your foot type, the lockdown through the back should actually be pretty decent with these. And then moving to the base, you'll find a design that is pretty standard Lotto for the most part. I would say more on the traditional side as far as the appearance is concerned. It does feature their Punto Flex system, which again is a trademark of the Lotto brand. They've had it on their football boots for as long as I can remember, where the idea is to give you that little bit of spring back. Is this truly the most responsive sole plate on the market? Absolutely not, but it doesn't feel flimsy, which I think is a good thing. Nothing about it feels cheap, which again, I think is super important for a football boot that retails for $200+. And then as far as the stud pattern is concerned, they do tout some traction benefits from some of these Pac-Man shaped studs that you have in the forefoot as well as at the back of the heel. But at the end of the day, this feels like a very traditional conical stud pattern that provides plenty of bite. The traction is really good and you do have that freedom to twist and pivot when your feet are planted, but in terms of giving you that kind of speed boot aggressive traction, they're just not blades. So at the end of the day, it's not really a positive or a negative, it's more so a matter of personal preference, where I think if you like a more traditional stud pattern, you're really gonna like this setup. And then there's the weight, where once upon a time, Lotto was actually making some of the lightest football boots money could buy. Granted, that was almost 20 years ago now, but I think a lot of people, again, for $200+, would expect the Solista to be pretty light. So we're gonna weigh them in real time, side by side against a competing laceless boot in the Predator 24 Elite, both in the same size, 9.5 US. We're actually gonna start with the Preds, and you can see that they weigh in at 7.1 ounces, the equivalent of 202 grams, which is about pretty standard for most high-end football boots these days. Remember those numbers, and we'll throw on the Lottos, and you can see that they weigh in at 7.2 ounces, the equivalent of 205 grams, which for those doing the math at home is 3 grams more than the Preds, which isn't really a big deal. Like I said, that's kind of standard for what you're gonna find from most high-end football boots, but given that the Solista is technically a speed boot, especially with super leggera written on the side, even though there's nothing super light about this design, it's no different other than the graphics themselves. If you compare these to, granted, the more expensive laceless F50 Elite, those are going to be about 25 grams heavier. So if you're just looking for the lightest possible laceless boots, these obviously aren't it. Something that is so hard to do with a pair of laceless football boots is achieve good fit and overall comfort, where the two kind of go hand in hand. If a boot doesn't fit well, it's very difficult for it to be comfortable. And I think what Lotto have done here is actually pretty smart in terms of sacrificing a little bit of that responsiveness for the sake of having a super soft, pliable, and slightly stretchy knitted upper, where, like I've talked about throughout this video, they really just feel like you've slid a pair of socks on your feet and strapped some studs to the bottom. They just have that ability to form around your foot in a way that feels comfortable without being restrictive, because obviously you don't want them to feel like they're squeezing your feet. And I think in that regard, they've actually really done a good job of figuring out the amount of tension that's required from the stretch across the top of the foot with that laceless system. And for whatever reason, depending on the shape of your feet, if you don't have that tension, they give you that option with the double fit insoles to remove a little bit of that volume and get the snug fit that you're looking for. Granted, as with any laceless boot, until you actually try them on, it's really difficult to say whether or not they're going to fit you comfortably. But I think as far as laceless boots go, these actually have some really decent width to them pretty much all the way through. The heel, I would say, is probably the tightest part of the overall fit, but that's an area where, again, because you don't necessarily have that lockdown with laces kind of anchoring your heel down and back into the boots, you want that little bit of tightness there. So in terms of overall fit and comfort, I think they've done a really good job when it comes to width. These are obviously going to be football boots that I wouldn't necessarily recommend for somebody with really wide or even really narrow feet. Laceless boots in general are designed to fit the masses, but if you're on the extreme end when it comes to foot shape, whether it's narrow or wide, I wouldn't necessarily recommend laceless boots. And as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing these in my usual size 9.5 US, and the fit and the length is perfect. So if you are looking to get a pair for yourself, I would strongly recommend going true to size in order to achieve the best possible fit. So in conclusion, for being a 5-year-old design, despite technically being 5 generations on, the Solista 108 Gravity is overall a very solid pair of laceless football boots that I think still compare well to other high-end alternatives. Having said that, unlike 5 years ago when the original Solista 103 Gravity came out, I thought those were pretty exceptional compared to a lot of the laceless alternatives that were available at that time. With that in mind, I think Adidas has really stepped up their game, especially in 2024, and has also even lowered the amount of laceless options that they have available, where when you're talking about their top-end options in the Predator 24 Elite, the F50 Elite, as well as the F50 Plus, all 3 of those laceless football boots are ones that I would personally rather wear over the Solistas. Granted, they're all more expensive, and at $212, the Solista definitely offers better overall value for money, but like I said earlier in the video, they're not the most popular. You're going to be able to get them deeply discounted, and for around $150 or less, picking a pair of these up rather than a laceless takedown model from Adidas or any brand for that matter would be the smartest choice you could possibly make. If you're into laceless football boots, especially if you want them to feel as close to a pair of socks as possible, I don't think you'll be disappointed with what the Solista 8 has on offer. Although if you can find a 7, 6, 4, or 3 on sale, those are going to be just as good.